Think about that just mentally. That you're taking and persecuting this individual, you're going to kill them and then harvest their organs to sell them. This is just horrific taking place.
The Chinese Communist Party touts itself as a global leader, and it is a leader. It's leading the world in religious persecution, says Sam Brownback, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. From forced organ harvesting from Falun Gong practitioners to forced sterilization of Uyghurs, the Chinese regime has waged a, quote, war with faith. And it's exporting its repressive model abroad to the detriment of freedoms across the globe. But authoritarianism ultimately can't defeat faith, Brownback says, in China or anywhere. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Ambassador Sam Brownback, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Happy to join you. I wish it was in-person interview, but this will have to do.
You had an article that you wrote recently, which was "Humanity Will Win the Battle for Religious Freedom." Okay, and frankly, a lot of people, not just in the US, but in Canada, my home country, and elsewhere, are frankly not so sure about this right now, especially China, which we'll talk about. Tell me what you're thinking here.
It is in the innate nature of the human being to have dignified freedom. I just don't think any government over an extended period of time can win this fight of tying people down from their freedom. Now, if that weren't in the nature of the human species, if it weren't in our soul and our heart, I might say, you could look at these times right now and say, we're just headed downhill. But it's within us. It's within our created DNA that we want freedom. We want to be free. And there's just no government that over an extended period of time can suppress that. What we've seen taking place recently, certainly within the last couple of decades, is really governments confining this human right and the human dignity, particularly on religious freedom. But I think you're starting to see that breaking out now too. I think you're seeing changes happening really even before our very eyes that are opening up religious freedom around the world.
So I also wanted to ask you, you were actually instrumental, I think, just over 20 years ago in some pretty landmark legislation related to international religious freedom, and you've been following that up all along. Where does this passion for freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of religion for you come from?
In my own personal surge, my faith is incredibly important to me. And then early on, when I was in the U.S. Senate, I had a staff member that had worked in this field and started to tell me about people that were in prison around the world simply because they wanted to practice a different faith than the dominant beliefs in that country. And it just rubbed against me. And that may be my background in Kansas. My mother grew up on the property where John Brown would stay when he was the Bleeding Kansas, and we had the slavery situation. And so anything that smacks of slavery to me just rubs against me. And I carried the original human trafficking bill. Don Nichols carried the original religious freedom bill, but I was a main supporter of it. And these have always been a deeply passionate piece of mine. And I love the days whenever we get somebody out of prison somewhere around the world that's in prison simply because they want to practice their faith, and when we can help get them out and get them free, those are just great, happy days.
Well, so let's talk about communist China. This is actually a little bit of my background. I came in from the human rights around China thing. That's why I ended up working with the Epoch Times in the first place, as this is an issue that's particularly important to me. You describe what's happening in China as a war on faith, and that's pretty strong words. And I wanted you to basically have the opportunity to extrapolate on that a little bit.
Well, it is, and they are after all faiths. I gave that speech in Hong Kong a year and a half ago, declaring that China was at war with faith. It is a war they will not win. It's a war that the kingdom of man has tried to win for millennia, and they're not going to win this one, and they haven't won it in the past. And I think you can just look at all the evidence. You can look at what China did to the Tibetan Buddhist and the persecution and keeping the Dalai Lama out of the country, and now even declaring that they get to appoint the next Dalai Lama, the Chinese Communist Party. You can look at Xinjiang, which is probably the most egregious religious persecution taking place in the world today. Million Muslim Uyghurs in concentration camps. And then if you get out of those, you're in this police state of a virtual prison by all the cameras and the facial recognition systems and the limitations on you, the destruction of the house church, the desire to control the Catholic Church, the persecution of Falun Gong, the credible reporting now of taking place of organ harvesting, and then top it all off with Hong Kong, that's supposed to be two systems, one country, being merged into one system, one country, and the system is what Beijing is saying. This is just across the board. It's everywhere. It has gone more nationalistic, and instead it used to be more at a provincial level, and it's gone harsher under Xi Jinping. His main implementer is Chen Quanguo. He's the party chair over Xinjiang. He put down the Buddhists. He's putting down the Muslims now, and the United States recently sanctioned him with global Magnitsky sanctions.
Well, so, speaking of sanctions, I mean, recently a number of Xinjiang officials were sanctioned by the U.S., but what I noted in particular was the sanctioning of this, the Xinjiang, XPCC, Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps. And now this is a massive, massive paramilitary operation company, what you call it, in Xinjiang, responsible for a significant portion of its economy. Some people are describing these as some of the first real kind of biting sanctions on the issue of religious freedom. I wanted you to have the opportunity to comment on that a little bit.
Well, you're seeing the Trump administration go hammer and tong at these human rights abuses, and particularly religious freedom abuses that are taking place in Western China. And we are going at the companies that are then used in the forced labor that is being forced by the Chinese Communist Party. We are going at the entities that their technology is being used to observe and to oppress people. We really see the future of oppression being fewer people in concentration camps and more people controlled in a society with 24-hour surveillance systems on people and limiting what they can do in that society. So we're going at those technology companies, we're going at the production companies, we're going at the individuals, and we are serious about this, that this is wrong what China is doing. They seek to be a global leader, and yet they're leading the world in persecution. The global leadership is in persecution. That's not the kind of leadership that the world wants, and the world needs to see this. And we're putting a big light on it.
So, recently there have been reports of basically the Chinese Communist Party mandating that hospitals in Xinjiang either abort or even, kill after birth Uyghur babies. I find it even difficult to talk about this, frankly. What do you make of these reports?
I make that they're credible. I make that they're credible reports are, and they're in the numbers. We certainly see that in the numbers of Uyghur children being born dropping precipitously. We have eyewitness accounts of people that have gotten out and have testified now regarding this. And this is at the horrific level. Again, here's China that's holding itself up, the Communist Party, as a global leader, and doing this to an ethnic group of their own people. I think this is completely unconscionable, and it's taking place today. For years, the world kind of turned a blind eye to what the Falun Gong was saying about organ harvesting. And people were saying, well, I'm not sure this is credible. And, yeah, you would see it, you'd look at it. It was in the numbers, the circumstantial evidence was there. Now you've had two credible institutions outside of China saying that, yes, this organ harvesting is taking place. And think about that just mentally, that you're taking and persecuting this individual, you're going to kill them, and then harvest their organs to sell them. This is just horrific taking place. And I just don't think the world can now sit back and say, well, we're just not sure if this is happening. That just sounds like what we've done in past genocide, crimes against humanity, ethnic purges, whatever category you want to start calling these things, where we just want to say, I don't really want to confront the factual setting here. I'd rather just not know. I think we do know, and I think we have to act.
Well, these recent reports, suggest to me something on the level of genocide. In fact, the China tribunal that did the work on the forced organ harvesting and, established that it's credible most recently, they kind of had a debate in their report, from what I recall, whether or not they said, well, because the profit motive is so big, because they're making billions of dollars off this murder for organs, we're not quite sure if it's fair to call it genocide. For that reason, I mean, that just, chilled me to the bones.
It should all of us. We're not talking about being in the 1800s or the 1940s. This is 2020, and this is happening. And it's happening in our world today. I think it should be absolutely chilling to people to think that this is happening, and that once they hear this, and the other side of this too, I want to say, if China would just come forward and open up their books on their organ transplant system and show people everything that's taking place, be transparent about it. If they're saying it doesn't happen, they have the answer in their own hands. They could answer this credibly themselves if this is not happening. They choose not to, and they are not answering it. And the same with Xinjiang. They say these are education camps. Okay, well, then open them up. Let people see what's taking place. And they don't. They'll take people on tightly controlled trips and set up apparatuses instead of really open it up. And they ignore the factual eyewitness accounts from people that have come out of these concentration camps and what they personally experienced.
Ambassador Brownback, you made the point earlier that the world for quite some time was turning a blind eye to China. The executive director of the Falun Dafa Information Center, Levi Braude, made this observation recently that, the persecution of Falun Gong has been happening for 21 years. Actually, the State Department marked that in a statement by Secretary Pompeo, which I'm sure you also had something to do with. But he actually mentioned that the inaction over 21 years allowed the CCP to hone these methods of use of indoctrination, torture, the technology over development over decades, now to be applied onto the house Christians, onto the Uyghurs, and so forth. What are your thoughts?
That's been true throughout history. If you don't stand up to the bully, they just keep coming. And too often people in the past have said, well, that's not my religious group. The Falun Gong are not who I adhere to. If they pick on them, that's one thing, but I'm a Muslim, or I'm a Christian, or I'm a Buddhist, or religion doesn't matter to me, and so I'm just not going to pay any attention to it. And yet we've seen repeatedly throughout history, if you don't stand up to them early, they just keep coming. The Communist Party, communism as a philosophy, has had trouble with faith from its very beginning. It's always persecuted faith. It doesn't have a space for the believing in a higher moral authority. The higher moral authority is the Communist Party. It's an officially atheistic system. They don't abide by an allegiance to any sort of other authority. And so they may come at a smaller group, but they're going to come after the next groups, and they perfect the systems. I would say that they perfected in Tibet what they're using on the Uyghurs today in Xinjiang. And it was the same person, Chen Guangguo, that started in Tibet, and they moved him then to Xinjiang, gave him more budget, more police, more technology. He's got the system in place now. And then my concern is, too, they're going to start marketing and selling these sort of authoritarian control systems to other authoritarian regimes around the world that want to seek to control their population through the use of these advanced technologies.
You mentioned Hong Kong earlier, and so are you seeing the encroachment on freedom of belief since the advent of this national security law in Hong Kong? And if so, how is that playing out?
I'm not getting reporting on it yet. I look for it to happen soon. Hong Kong, the people of Hong Kong have been very brave in standing up, and they have a guarantee, an agreement that they're to have two systems for a 50-year time period. Their 50 years isn't up, and yet they're being brought into this maw of the Communist Party and being run. So I anticipate you're going to start seeing the persecution taking place there. But I haven't had a series of reports coming in yet, and maybe even this interview will stir people up to start sending things in that they're seeing taking place now.
Well, we'll definitely make sure it gets to the right people in that vein. Ambassador Brownback, you have initiated these ministerials on religious freedom, now of which there have been several. I wanted you to speak a little bit on sort of the purpose behind them and sort of what the impact now has been, because it's something that you seem to have found has some sort of positive effect, hence it's being repeated. How is this working? What is going on with these?
Yeah, two things. One is we wanted to really motivate and really urge and move forward governments around the world that are interested in religious freedom and get them to make it a bigger piece of their portfolio because there's so much religious persecution that's taking place. And if we don't get on top of this issue of religious persecution, of persecution of religious minorities, you're going to see a lot more security problems, a lot more fighting, a lot more violence around the world. So we're really trying to motivate governments first to just stand for everybody's religious freedom everywhere, all the time. That's the standard. And we're seeing more governments step up and say, yes, this is a key piece of us moving forward on human rights writ large. The second is we want to really create a grassroots movement around the world of religious freedom. That this is an inherent part of who you are as a person. And we want people to be able to practice their faith freely. And to do that, we need to see people all over the world stand up and say, look, this is my right. This is my right as a human being. It's my right under UN Charter. My view, it's your God-given right that you were given by the Creator. And that happens to be in our Constitution in the United States. So we really want to do both, is get that grassroots movement going. We have a series of religious freedom roundtables now starting around the world. We hope more come, where religious adherents of all different stripes and of none at all, atheists as well, come together to stand for each other's religious freedom. And then we want governments at the governmental level to become far more active in pushing religious freedom. And so far, we're seeing a really swift uptake in this idea.
And I noticed that in your the article that I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, you actually mentioned, the freedom to believe and not to believe, and that is actually the ultimately the freedom of conscience, as I understand it. It
is, and that's in the UN Charter. It's in our Constitution. It's in many countries' Constitution, but it's the individual human being's dignified choice, and no government has the right to interfere with that. That person gets to believe whatever they choose to believe, as long as they're peaceful, or not to believe anything at all. And a number of people in the faith community look at this as God's freedom that He gave us to choose whatever we wanted to choose, and we could choose Him, we could choose not. But that was such a key part of us being dignified creatures, again, in my estimation, created in the image of God. It's that choice. It's that free will.
So any particular success stories, I guess, that you would like to draw attention to for the Office of International Religious Freedom?
Two really stand out right now. One is Sudan. First country in the world that's repealed blasphemy laws. And this is a country that overthrew a radical Islamist government that had previously housed Osama bin Laden. And they've repealed it all. And they said you're free to do what you choose. And it's just amazing what they've done. And Uzbekistan in Central Asia is a country that really has broken with more of a heavy-handed police state past and said, no, we want to be an open, free country. And I predict you're going to start seeing a lot more open societies in the Middle East taking place with the move that UAE and Israel just did of coming together on diplomatic relations. And the UAE is pioneering some of these fields where they're going in and say, look, we believe our faith, we're Sunni Muslims, but we want to have an open society where people are free to practice their faith without fear of reprisal. And you're seeing other countries in that region really see that as something they need to do. They've got young populations in the area. The younger people just want a normal country with normal freedoms. So I think you're going to start seeing this 2.0 of the Arab Spring, where the governments are going to work with the people more to let these societies open up and blossom more.
It was fascinating to see the news today that the first, I think, is a direct flight from Israel to Sudan is now, the inaugural flight happened. Not something I was expecting to see.
It's really stunning. I've worked on Sudanese issues for 20 years because the previous government was just so bad on persecuting people, and now you got to see them having flights to Israel, do away with blasphemy laws, having an open society. But they're not the only ones. I'm hearing a lot of action. A lot of it's percolating underneath the surface. But these countries are saying we've got to listen to where our people want to go, and they just want to be free, and they want to make their own choices, and that's why I'm very hopeful.
Aside from communist China, where are the real pressure points right now in the world that your office is focused on?
Well, the communist China is the big one because they're really the biggest enabler of human rights abuses around the world. And they walk around with a lot of money and they try to bribe a lot of places. So, I mean, really, they're in a kind of a league by their own because of their status and stature. We're also, though, seeing lots of difficulties developing in Nigeria, northern Nigeria in particular, where you've just got a lot of terrorist groups coming in and wanting to establish the caliphate in some of those regions in northern Nigeria and adjacent countries. It's a very, very troubling region of the world to watch. Pakistan has been in a lot of difficulties and just more and more kind of it seems like an acceleration of communal violence taking place. And we're seeing communal violence throughout the Indian subcontinent, really. India as well, not at the governmental level, but that more at the communal level, but a lot of violence. That's why we keep pushing countries saying, you've got to stand up for religious freedom for everybody all the time, because otherwise within your own country, you're going to see these violent explosions taking place. It's going to be bad for your society, bad for your people, bad for your long-term economic growth, bad for the security of your own people. And you may not agree with people's theology. This is not about establishing a common theology. It is about a common human right that is fundamental to the growth of us as human beings.
Powerful words, Ambassador Brownback. Any final thoughts before we finish up?
I hope people will really engage on this topic on a personal level, make it something that they become educated about and advocate to their elected representatives, to people that they're around. That they write about it, because the human rights project around the world has been in decline for the last 20, 25 years. And we think, the United States thinks, if we can start to get some of these fundamental human rights right, like religious freedom, you're going to see the other human rights start to flourish more, the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the other issues will start to really flourish more. But it's like in football, you got to get blocking and tackling right before you can pass the ball. This is one of those foundational ones, and I hope people will advocate for it amongst the folks that they're around. and I hope they'll pray if they're people of faith.
Ambassador Brownback, such a pleasure to have you on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.